Hello, and once again, welcome to our daily reflection. Now, this morning's reading is taken from Paul's letter to the Romans, and it's from chapter 11, verses 13 to 24. I'm talking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I make much of my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in amongst the others and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not boast over those branches. If you do, consider this. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid, for if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God. Sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted back in, for God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? Now, it's a regrettable but true fact that the history of the Christian church doesn't always make for very palatable reading. And that's especially true, of course, if you happen to be a Christian. For example, I've always found it very hard to understand, but impossible to ignore the fact that for many centuries, anti-Semitism flourished across large areas of Christendom. And not only did the church do little to prevent and discourage this prejudice, it actually added fuel to the fire by declaring that it was the Jews who had actually killed Jesus, despite the insistence of all four Gospels that it was the Romans. In the middle section of Paul's letter to the young Christian church in Rome, whilst he celebrates the fact that he sees himself as the apostle to the Gentiles, he nonetheless lays out his grief and deep regret that many of his fellow Jews have yet to accept and adopt the truth of the Christian gospel. And in today's reading, he appears to suspect that some of the Gentile members of the Roman Christian church are in danger of believing that they have replaced Jews in God's plan, and that the church is now a kind of Gentiles-only family. At that time, many ordinary people in Rome distrusted and disliked Jewish people. And how easy it would have been for the Gentile members of that little church in Rome to pick up the attitude of society around them and join in the general anti-Semitism of the day. Well, in his letter to them, Paul was having none of it. And for me, as a keen gardener, The illustration that he uses to make plain his hope that more of his fellow Jews will come to Christ and that they will be welcomed by all and actually enrich the church, well, it fits in really well with my horticultural hobby. Many years ago now, I remember my father explaining to me that almost all of the beautiful roses that graced his garden were in fact the product of two separate plants. One had a very vigorous rootstock, but produced only quite uninteresting flowers, whilst the other one produced spectacular blooms, but was more susceptible to disease due to its poor rootstock. The elegant solution was, of course, to graft one onto the other and thereby produce a plant that was both strong and beautiful. And this technique of grafting was nothing new and had in fact been used by olive growers in Mediterranean countries for thousands of years. Some olive trees grew wild in the country, and whilst they would often be quite strong in themselves, they wouldn't produce good fruit. The olive farmer might decide to take all that inner strength and harness it by grafting shoots cut from a proper cultivated olive into the trunk of a wild olive, thus combining the energy of the wild tree and the fruitfulness of the cultivated one. And what Paul now wants to suggest is that when Gentiles become Christians, the actual opposite is happening, and they are like wild branches grafted into the original cultivated olive tree. Now, he's well aware that this is the complete opposite of normal practice, but the reason he stresses this is to turn the situation around and confront the Gentile Christians with the danger of their suspected arrogance and anti-Semitism. They are the ones who have been brought to God by a miracle of grace, and they have neither right nor reason to believe that they are now superior to their Jewish non-believers. Those original cultivated branches have for now been cut out of the tree, but they can always be grafted back in if, as Paul says, they do not persist in their unbelief. And likewise, if the Roman Christians continue to be arrogant and boastful, Paul warns that they too should expect to be cut out and cast away. And so, reflecting on this passage, I do believe that what it holds is every bit as relevant for us today as it was to those who first heard it. And that is that we should never take our faith for granted, and that we are saved only through God's grace, and that racism, and especially anti-Semitism, should have no place in a Christian or indeed in any other society. So thank you for listening today, and may God bless us all. Amen.